I hope she doesn't get discharged." The moment I heard those words from behind the wall, my heart was frozen. It was the night I came home after spending 10 hours on the road, just released from the hospital. Through the door, I overheard my mother and brother speaking their shocking truth. It was the moment I realized to them I was nothing more than a burden. That morning, the sunlight had poured through the hospital room window, gentle and warm, as if it were celebrating my new beginning. The doctor assured me my recovery was going well, and I was allowed to leave earlier than expected. When I found out that I had a tumor on my thyroid, I told my family that it was just a minor issue, so they wouldn't worry. Today was my mother's 57th birthday. I'd taken it as a sign that my discharge fell on the same day. If I showed up looking healthy, maybe she'd feel relieved. That thought alone drove me to push myself to make the trip. I drove for 10 hours, taking several breaks along the way. On the passenger seat were a ribbon-wrapped gift box and a prescription for my medication. My body wasn't fully recovered, but I wanted to see my mother's happy face. So I knowingly pushed past my limits and kept driving. I arrived at the house a little after 9 p.m. The porch light was on at the home tucked into a quiet residential neighborhood. I hadn't lived there for years, but my hand trembled slightly as I slid the key into the locks. It was proof that this place still weighed heavily on my heart. Without knocking, I gently opened the door. Just as I was about to call out, the voices of my mother and brother from deep inside the living room made my entire body freeze. Dad left that house to her. I want it. I hope she doesn't get discharged. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. But then my brother continued, destroying any doubt. "It's true. She said it was just a small tumor, but that's probably to keep us from worrying. Honestly, if something happened to her, it would actually make things easier. Less stress for us, especially with the loan." I stood motionless behind the door, holding my breath. My heartbeat grew erratic. A ringing filled my ears. The sound of my heartbeat was so loud it drowned out their words. She's trying to take everything for herself. Grandpa's house, the trust fund. All while playing the poor victim. My mother's voice was laced with hatred and envy. Ever since my parents divorced 15 years ago, something had always felt strained in our family. My mother supported the household with part-time jobs, and we lived in financial instability. My brother was forgiven for everything. I was expected to be perfect. My mother placed all her hopes and responsibilities on me. "You're the dependable one," she said, yet mistakes were never allowed. When my grandfather left the house, my mother said nothing. But I remember her attitude growing sharper after that. She believed anything she needed should naturally become hers. If someone else had what she wanted, she saw it as her right to take it back. My brother played along with her, staying close. On the surface, he was friendly and easygoing. But he always belittled my efforts and pain, laughing, "You're too serious." He echoed my mother's feelings to dodge any responsibility. I quietly shut the door and exhaled deeply. The cold sank into my bones. I took the gift box from my bag and gently set it beside the entrance. I put the key back in my pocket and returned to my car without making a sound. I had pushed myself to come here, fresh out of the hospital, just to celebrate her birthday. And yet, all I heard was how they wished I hadn't come back. As I started the engine, I realized something. There was no need for me to return to this house ever again. I took a deep breath and picked up my phone. From my contacts, I found the name Samantha and called her without hesitation. "Hello, Samantha? Sorry it's late. Do you have a moment?" Samantha didn't sound surprised to hear my voice. She simply said quietly, "It's okay. Lauren, did something happen?" Things got a little messy at my parents' house. I'll explain later. Can I come over? Of course. I'll leave the door unlocked. Take your time. Samantha is my cousin. She's 7 years older and has always felt like a big sister to me. She had long sensed the tension between me and my mother. Whenever I was hurt, she would gently stay by my side. She had struggled in her own family, too. She once told me that she had spent years carrying the burden of her parents' expectations. Even after gaining independence, she wrestled with how to maintain distance from them. That's why, when I said, "I don't know how to deal with my mom," she never criticized me, she just listened. More than my mother or brother, Samantha felt like a real family. I truly believed that. As I drove, I felt exhaustion sting my eyes. My body, fresh from the hospital, was honest. I was running on empty physically and emotionally. Still, going back to that house was no longer an option. I arrived at Samantha's house just before midnight. She stood at the entrance in her pajamas, and as soon as she saw my face, she hugged me without saying a word. "You've been through so much." Just those words made everything I had been holding back collapse all at once. Without uttering a sound, I buried my face in her chest and cried. "It's okay. You're safe now. No one here will ever hurt you." With those words, Samantha guided me into the living room. Her house felt nostalgic and warm. Photos from her travels and softly colored paintings hung on the walls, creating a comforting atmosphere. Later, as she boiled water, I took my prescribed medication and medical file out of my bag. Next to them was the key to the house I inherited from my grandfather. I'm not going back to that house anymore. When I said that, Samantha just nodded without a word. With her, I didn't need to make excuses or pretend. I could speak from the heart. I thought it meant something being discharged on the same day as Mom's birthday. So I brought her a gift and went home. But then I heard her say, "I want the house Dad left to her. I hope she doesn't get discharged. I can't trust anything anymore." My voice trembled. But no tears came. "Do you know what your aunt has been telling people about your illness?" I shook my head. "She's been saying you were on the verge of death, crying at work and around the neighborhood, saying, 'I thought we were going to lose her.'" I closed my eyes. Somewhere inside me, I had already suspected as much. To her, pity is a kind of asset. Maybe she's keeping herself afloat by playing the tragic mother. Samantha's voice was quiet, but within it was deep understanding and pain. "But Lauren, you have the right to live your own life. You don't have to play anyone else's role anymore." That night, I slept in the guest room at Samantha's house. Though I was exhausted, I barely slept. Still, I felt a little bit of the tension that had lived deep in my chest begin to loosen. The next morning, I stared at the ceiling for a while after waking up. My body still felt heavy, with a dull ache lingering in my head. But the suffocating air I felt in that house was gone. Samantha's home was peaceful. All I could hear were the faint sounds of morning life in the distance and the soft pour of coffee into a cup. I slowly sat up and picked up the phone from the nightstand. The number of notifications made my breath catch. There were over 30 messages from Mom on the screen. "Where did you go last night?" "I'm worried. You just left the present and disappeared without saying anything. Even David was hoping to see you." Each message was coded with carefully crafted kindness. None of them were genuine. Holding my phone, I went down to the living room. Samantha was in the kitchen, toasting bread. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" I nodded slightly and showed her the screen. This was waiting for me when I woke up. Should I reply? Samantha looked me in the eye, then quietly let out a breath. "If you respond, it'll just be the same cycle all over again. What you need right now isn't a conversation. It's protection." Her words seemed to see right through my confusion. Protection? Yes. Protecting yourself and your rights. If you face your aunt in your current state, you'll just be drained again. And about the house and the trust fund, you should really take steps to secure them. I nodded, though I still felt unsure. The house and the trust fund my grandfather left me. It was clear, especially after what I heard yesterday, that my mother and brother considered them theirs by default. I never really thought about any of it before. They're family, so I assumed there was no ill will. But if what I heard was their true feelings, then I can't stay silent anymore. That's exactly right. Samantha said this as she placed the toast onto a plate. You don't have to hate them, but you can draw boundaries. It's not cold, it's the necessary action to protect yourself. What you've been doing all this time was trying to be the beloved daughter. But now, it's time to make choices as an independent adult. As I took a bite of the toast, I quietly reflected. My mother probably expected me to apologize right away. To say, "I'm sorry for the misunderstanding," and go back to how things were. But I wouldn't go back. I shouldn't. That day, Samantha introduced me to a trustworthy lawyer. Her name was Kimberly. A calm woman in her late 40s, she spoke with a soft tone, but every word carried weight. First, let's confirm the details of the trust fund. If it's managed under your name, we need to consider legal safeguards to prevent any unauthorized use. I nodded and took out the trust agreement my grandfather had drawn up before his passing, along with the documents for the house title. Kimberly reviewed each one carefully. Here's something that concerns me. There was a period when the agreement included a clause allowing temporary usage with family consent. Family, you mean my mother? Most likely, yes. There is a record showing that someone submitted a request to change the trustee once in the past. It was never approved, but there's no doubt someone tried to gain access. My chest tightened. I hadn't known. No one had ever told me anything about it. It may be best to restructure the trust so that full control rests with you alone, without requiring any consent or involvement from others. We can also restrict all financial information so that only a trusted lawyer or third party can access it. Would you like to proceed? Yes, please. I responded without hesitation, surprising even myself. It wasn't fear. It was a quiet resolve, something that had emerged beyond sadness and anger. In the past few days, I had begun to understand something. That kindness and self-protection can coexist. After speaking with Kimberly, I decided to review my medical records and health insurance registration. Until then, I had used the one my mother set up for me. But going forward, I would manage everything myself. It was my first true step toward independence. That night, over the dinner Samantha prepared, I smiled quietly. I feel like I'm slowly reclaiming my life. Samantha smiled back and poured water into my glass. Yes, you are. You're allowed to live your life for yourself now. Her words sank gently and deeply into my heart. After that, I spent about a week quietly at Samantha's house. Her thoughtful care and the calm atmosphere gradually eased my tension, and I began to feel more at peace. One afternoon, just after cleaning up lunch and folding the laundry, my phone buzzed softly. Kimberly's name appeared on the screen. "Hello, Lauren. Do you have a moment?" Her voice was as calm as always, but what she said next made my spine go cold. "I need to inform you of something. During the investigation of the trust, we found multiple instances of unauthorized personal withdrawals. They were recorded as loans, but there is no history of repayment." I gasped. "Who did it?" "The listed applicant is your mother. The records show withdrawals when you were 20, 23, and 26 years old, amounts ranging from $5,000 to $10,000. The stated purposes were household medical expenses and emergency living support." My mind went blank. Legally, what does that mean? If you choose to pursue it, this qualifies as misuse. You could press charges or file a damages claim. It all depends on your decision. I closed my eyes for a few seconds. Looking back, everything started to make sense. Paying for my education by myself. Her constant complaints about money even after I started working. How I always ended up covering for my brother every time he quit a job. She hadn't borrowed anything, she had taken it. Realizing that, the sorrow that had long settled in my heart quietly transformed into anger. "I want to press charges against my mother. Please begin formal proceedings. I can't ignore this any longer." Kimberly's voice nodded in agreement. Understood. 2 days later, on a Saturday afternoon, I was reading a book alone at Samantha's house. She had gone out to buy groceries for dinner. In the strange silence, the doorbell suddenly rang. I wondered who it could be at this hour. When I opened the door, my mother and brother were standing there. "It's been a while." My mother smiled. It was the same performative smile she always wore around others. "Sorry to drop by unannounced. We just wanted to talk." My brother was dressed casually, hands stuffed in his pockets. I stared at them in silence. I had already decided I wouldn't run or hide. Still, my heart was pounding. Samantha's out, but if it's just for a bit. I let them into the living room. My mother looked around the room expectantly. My brother flopped down onto the couch like he owned the place. "You look well." "I'm relieved," my mother said as she stared intently at my face. "Hey, about that night, why did you leave without saying anything?" She leaned in and lowered her voice. "You finally came back, but you just left a gift and disappeared. We were worried, you know." But the tone of her voice held more annoyance than concern, like her plans had been disrupted. "Are you feeling okay? You just got out of the hospital, right?" Did the doctor say you're really recovering? My brother added, You still don't look so good, muttering it while scanning me with calculating eyes. I stared at them silently. They clearly didn't know I had overheard their conversation that night. I hope she doesn't get discharged. The inherited house was supposed to become ours. If I hadn't heard their true feelings, I might have been smiling with them right now. But my silence was no longer the silence of endurance. It was the beginning of a boundary. Mom, I've decided to stop holding back. That night, I heard you and David say you hoped I wouldn't be discharged. That you wanted the house Grandpa left me. My mother's expression stiffened. That was a misunderstanding. Neither of us meant it. We were just struggling financially, that's all. I cut her off. I don't believe it was a misunderstanding. And I know everything you did. I took out the envelope Kimberly had given me from my bag. These are the records from the trust fund investigation. They show the amounts you borrowed in my name without my consent. My brother leaned forward. What is that? When did you start looking into all this? David, be quiet. Even I could hear the sharp edge in my voice. I've decided to handle this legally. I'm not going to ignore it just because we're family. My mother's face drained of color. Her lips twitched, and she was visibly shaken. You're really going to go that far? Are you serious? Yes, I am. While you were sending dozens of messages pretending to be worried, you were secretly using my assets for years. That says it all. After a long silence, my brother gave a dry laugh. I was just helping because Mom asked me to. It's her responsibility, right? So he was running away again. I looked at him with a quiet kind of disbelief, beyond shock. You were both my family. But now, I no longer see either of you as people I can trust. From now on, stay out of my life and my property. When I finished, my heart was strangely calm. There was no guilt. No regret. My mother tried to say something but swallowed her words. My brother averted his eyes and got up, heading for the door. Once it closed behind them, I let out a long breath. It felt as if the weight that had been buried deep inside me was finally beginning to lift. At last, I was beginning to take back my life. After further discussion with Kimberly, we decided to initiate formal legal action. The evidence of trust fund misuse was sufficient to pursue both civil and criminal claims. Certified letters were sent to my mother and brother. Their responses were exactly what I expected. Just a misunderstanding. We didn't mean it like that, they repeated. No sincere apology. No offer to repay. If anything, they acted like it was merely a family matter to be settled quietly. That only strengthened my resolve. 3 months later, I found myself in court. The courtroom was filled with a heavy silence, untouched by the warmth outside. I sat at the witness stand. In front of me were the judge and jury. To the left sat my mother. Even seated, she looked out of place and visibly anxious. Still, her hair was perfectly done, and she wore light makeup, desperately clinging to the version of herself meant for appearances. We had not spoken once since the lawsuit began. Not a single apology, no word from my brother either. My lawyer, Kimberly, calmly presented the facts. Unauthorized use of trust funds. 3 separate incidents of unapproved loans. false declarations. No attempts to repay, no effort to consult or confirm. The evidence I submitted included signed documents from those years, logs of communication with financial institutions, and my grandfather's written statement clearly naming me as the intended heir. My mother's lawyer claimed the defendant was in severe financial distress and acted for the sake of the family, without malicious intent. But I knew better. I knew how much of that distress she created herself. Covering my brother's expenses, spending on luxuries under the excuse of necessary costs, lying about my illness, telling people I was critical just to gather sympathy. Can someone like that really be said to have acted without ill intent? When called to the stand, I looked forward and spoke clearly. I wanted to believe I was loved. That's why I ignored everything about the money, the inheritance. But the night I came home from the hospital, I heard my mother and brother say, "I hope she doesn't get discharged. We want the house she inherited." That shattered everything. That was the truth. Even my illness was being used against me. I saw one of the jurors furrow their brow and glance toward my mother. Then came the day of the verdict. I sat once again in the gallery. My mother, unable to hide her tension, kept fidgeting with the papers in her hands. The judge read the decision in a steady voice. It is clear that the defendant misappropriated the trust assets without legal authority. These actions are deemed a breach of contract and carry elements of fraud. Therefore, the court imposes a civil repayment obligation, along with fines and partial criminal penalties. My mother let out a soft, pained sound. I watched her quietly. After the ruling, Kimberly leaned over and spoke gently. "You did well. This isn't just a victory. It's the establishment of a boundary." I nodded quietly. As I descended the courthouse steps, my mother called out from behind, chasing after me. "Lauren. Hey, did you really have to go this far? We're family. How could you do this?" I turned around. Her makeup was smudged, and for once it wasn't the face of a self-styled tragic heroine. It was raw confusion and fear. But I wasn't going to get drawn into her performance anymore. I may be your daughter, but I won't be your victim. If being family means being used, having my illness exploited, and my inheritance stolen, then that's not family. You have to take responsibility for what you did. She opened her mouth but said nothing, then looked down. I turned away and walked off. I could feel her eyes on my back, but I didn't look back. Outside, I saw Samantha waving at me from a distance. Her presence filled me with relief, and I smiled faintly. This trial was never about revenge. It was a necessary passage away to reclaim my life. A life that belonged to no one but me. And to protect it, I had finally learned to say no. After the trial, I slowly began building a new life. A small studio apartment in a quiet area a bit away from the station. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, a space no one could invade. The potted plant by the window had started to grow new leaves. My heart, too, was slowly beginning to heal. I returned to work. Not full-time yet, but I took on remote marketing projects 3 days a week. It wasn't overwhelming, but it gave me a sense of value. That pace felt just right. One Saturday, Samantha came over to cook lunch. While she moved efficiently around the kitchen, I sat at the dining table, tearing lettuce for the salad. By the way, I heard something, she began gently. I heard your mom and David are having a rough time right now. I paused my hands. Her face held no mockery or pity, just quiet truth. Between the fines and damages, they've been hit with quite a burden. I heard they sold the car and had to move. David still can't hold down a job, and they're living in a cheap apartment together. Even the people around them are starting to distance themselves. I absorbed her words in silence. In the beginning, your mom was furious. Kept complaining to everyone, saying, "Why is my daughter doing this to me?" But lately, she started to change a bit. She's seeing a doctor now, going to counseling. I heard her say something like, "I need to reevaluate how I think and how I interact with others." I couldn't say yet if that was true reflection. But if she had finally started facing herself, I wasn't going to deny that step. I see. That was all I said. I accepted it as fact. That was the closest I could get now. I think they need time to face themselves. And I've stopped hurting myself trying to save someone else. Samantha nodded and poured me a glass of water. You've really changed. If this were a few months ago, I think you would have cried hearing that. Yeah, probably. I smiled. Even to me, it felt like the most natural smile I'd ever worn. Later that afternoon, I stepped out onto the balcony and closed my eyes as I breathed in the fresh air. Even after hearing that my mother and brother had fallen from grace, I didn't feel like I'd won. What I wanted wasn't victory. It was the freedom to reclaim my life, on my terms. And now, I had finally found it. The scars hadn't completely vanished. But as each new day stacked gently on top, they were fading little by little. And I believe they will continue to fade